to me, what's really interesting is just seeing the evolution of Databricks, because I've known them from the get-go, when they were still the Spark company.
Welcome back to It's About Data. In episode 79, we review announcements from Databricks Data Plus AI Summit 2026. Tony, welcome from California. I believe you're close to the Moscone Center. Is that correct?
That's right. I'm in the Intercontinental Hotel, which is essentially the convention center hotel. And it's been kind of ground zero, the meeting place for us. For Databricks Data and AI Summit 2026, summit where they had a turnout of 30,000 people.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see the shift in this conference over the years, because I feel like back in, say, 2023, 2024, it had been renamed Data Plus AI Summit, but the story was more about like, we're a data stack that you can use to support AI models. You can do text processing, you can do all the stuff you need to do. And increasingly, AI is becoming the core of their product, as it is with a lot of other companies, but they bring a lot of engineering and expertise to the table to make it happen.
I mean, they were essentially calling themselves the AI data cloud before others were, but essentially everybody else is basically, adopting that moniker, because there's a realization today. I mean, as I said, to cover AI is like covering electricity, and to say, and you can't have AI without data. So the two really go, hand in hand.
Right.
Now, to me, what's really interesting is just seeing the evolution of Databricks, because I've known them from the get-go, when they were still the Spark company. I knew them even before they launched their initial Spark service. They were basically doing, I mean, obviously their game plan was to become a product company, but obviously started with, consulting on advancing this new processing technology, processing, Spark, which at the time I basically narrow-mindedly saw it as a substitute for MapReduce. Obviously, it's a lot more than that, as we spoke with Lisa Cow, who was just he was on our last episode. It's come a long way, baby. But the thing is that with Databricks itself, it could have just ended up being the Spark Cloud company, and probably would be like about 1% of what they are today. To me, essentially, where their evolution really started was with MLflow. Which is because Spark, even though there was Spark ML, this is during the 2010s. It was the classic, the era of classic, what we call classic AI, which is machine learning. Spark was never that well suited for machine learning, but with MLflow, there was basically an orchestration that Databricks open sourced, and really captured the imagination of data scientists who were working with essentially predictive analytics using machine learning. And then from there, essentially, they evolved into, they were the first, they really, even though there's been a lot of dispute as to who originated the term Lakehouse, Databricks was the first one to actually, have a Lakehouse. And so they became, at that point, a data platform.
Right. And frankly, like, it was really, so I actually got a preview of what they were calling back then just Databricks Delta, not Delta Lake, but Databricks Delta, before it even came out, like right before they made the public announcement. And it was very clear back then that they were going for, frankly, Snowflake's market share, right? The data warehousing, data platform space. And that already represented a big shift of going from kind of a deployment engine for this advanced processing tool to becoming a data platform. And it took them a long time, honestly, to mature it, but they definitely have now.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I mean, mature is kind of an understatement. The company has publicly released figures. I believe they're on a nearly a $7 billion run rate for this year.
Wow. Revenue.
That's big stuff. I think, I mean, gone unsaid here is, when are they finally going to IPO? And I think, essentially with SpaceX and all those other folks basically going for the $1 trillion IPOs and Anthropic, I think that's kind of for now kind of shut the window, because they would get kind of lost, because otherwise they would have been the big headline. But as I said, evidently the venture backers still keep pouring money into them as they get more diluted, because even though they get diluted, the base gets just bigger and bigger. But anyway, so it's very a very interesting company, and very unique, and obviously what we're here doing right now is it's just going to we're just going to scratch the surface, kind of going to kind of give you sort of my takeaways of some of the from roughly about a half dozen announcements. And there's also a thought that I've got. I had, and which we'll talk about later. I had some interesting discussion with Vast. They're actually starting to initiate a partnership with them. I've had this question in the back of my mind in terms of when will Databricks, come to terms with essentially the hybrid world, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But let me just kind of go into the first one, and this first, and we'll start with the data platform. And this very first announcement, which is Lakehouse RT, which is short for real time, not Russia today, and it's in beta. And what it's doing is it's taking to it's addressing a lot of the performance and concurrency issues of the Lakehouse, and it's being done through an algorithm that was developed, which is called codename Rayden, which is short for Reynolds Zins. He's one of the co-founders. Dream Engine. What they claim, and as I said, unfortunately, I can't give a lot of intelligent thought about this because I still need to know more of the gory details. But they claim that on cloud object storage that they've been able to basically achieve low latency and high concurrency, which almost sounds like, gee, we're sounding, it almost sounds like the CAP theorem there. They're claiming that they could do sub 100 millisecond latency with serving up to 12,000 queries per second according to their benchmarks.
Interesting.
So it's interesting, but to me that's a black box right now.
Yeah.
But it was a very interesting sort of an interesting announcement to throw out there. I'll have more. I'm going to have some discussions with them, when the debris settles, so we'll get a little more clarity on it.
Yeah, and the thing is with all these engines, I mean, Joe and I wrote about this in our book. Fundamentally, the key to real-time scaled hybrid, like scale being the object storage and streaming being the real-time, is it's basically herding cats, right? Like you have to have a lot of moving parts to query multiple systems and deliver the results combined from the two systems. And so what we've seen is the story of those systems getting easier and easier to use so that you don't have to have a Google scale engineering team to make it work. And it sounds like that's what they're offering, right? Databricks is going to do all the engineering. They're going to manage it. They're going to do the ops so that it just works for you. Of course, we have to actually get our hands on it to make our own conclusions.
But that's also the point. It's a SaaS service. So of course they're going to be handling, they're going to be handling all these optimizations. And they're pretty subtle. I mean, I did overhear, the first night I actually, during the cocktail hour, I actually heard basically one of my colleagues at Databricks kind of go through it. And I thought, like, this is deep and this is very intricate and we need to sit down and write this down. But anyway, another one, and this one actually, I had a good conversation with our friend Nikita, who we just had on for a couple episodes on Lakebase. And they've come up with Lakebase LTAP. And that's kind of like their play on, Gartner had come up with the term HTAP, which is hybrid transaction analytical processing, which is, an acronym. I don't know if the acronym worked, but in practice, for most platforms, HTAP was a compromise. You optimize basically for random, quick queries, or for, and in quantity with high concurrency, or do you optimize for doing deep analytics, which are very complex, long-running queries. And the key with LTAP, basically, it actually, in a certain way, will sound kind of familiar. It's about tiering, data tiering, storage tiering.
Exactly.
And that what Databricks is saying is that, they acquired Neon and they released Lakebase a year ago, and the idea is that they both were basically sitting, within the same, under common, I guess, sort of governance within the Databricks cloud, but they were still two separate data stores they had CDC mirroring to basically have Lakebase kind of basically refresh Lakehouse. This is where you try and bring the two together, and the idea here, obviously, is in a transaction store, it's row-based, and when you're doing these random lookups, you need rows. Obviously, for analytics, columnar, which basically is because you're not looking for individual entities. You're
scanning.
You're scaling. You take advantage of compression, and so I thought, well, how could they have a single storage, a single storage tier or a single, I shouldn't say tier, but have data just stored once. Yet it's both row-based and columnar. What's going on? I thought maybe they're projecting views. No, what it basically is, it's very elaborate tiering with the guiding notion that when the data comes in and it's hot, that's likely when you're going to be querying it, and that's so it'll initially be in cache, it'll be in memory, then it'll graduate to basically the NVMe with solid state disk, which is kind of default storage for transaction databases.
Yep.
But then as the data gets cooler, it then graduates, or basically, to going towards phases towards disk and object storage, which is where it gets transcoded into being columnar, with the guiding notion that if you still need to query that data as a transaction, that they'll take advantage of some very clever optimizations in cloud, basically in the cloud, where you can do workload isolation. To essentially rehydrate it as a row, either on a temporary basis, or where you're doing essentially kind of reverse ETL there in a way. Mm-hmm. It's not ETL really, but kind
you're basically caching it somehow if you know that you're going to serve a lot of these queries.
So and the thing is, what makes this possible is the cloud. Is that one, you can separate compute from storage, and also you can optimize each of the tiers. Whether it be storage tiers, whether it be compute. And of course, the networking is super fast. So it's the type of thing which you could brute force what you could do now, what you really could not do years ago.
Yeah, well, and the thing with HTAP is that typically there was a streaming engine in the middle somewhere. Yeah. So you had your transactional system, you had streaming, and then eventually the data made its way to object storage, just as you do here. But it does sound like even with all the optimizations and storage tiering, this is a simpler architecture. And right. I think that's Databricks' key advantage here. The other thing I want to point out is that Nikita said that Amazon Aurora was the inspiration for Neon. Aurora supports something like this, but it's much more complicated, right? As with many things Amazon, you have to have Aurora set up, and then you have to link it to Redshift. No one really wants to be using Redshift.
Yeah, well Amazon basically, AWS is essentially a prisoner of their own methodology.
Exactly. Yeah.
The two pizza box rule, and I think they've really hit the wall in terms of their idea of fit for purpose databases, where the real is really trying to we're trying to collapse the modern data stack and the modern database stack.
Exactly right. Yeah, and this, granted, I mean, we kind of over text talked about this a bit, but you're skeptical of Databricks' ability to really take off in the application space. But I think this is very compelling. I think they're going to see a lot of application developers move on to the stack.
Well, actually, where I was talking about is I was skeptical about in the enterprise application space.
Got it.
I think actually this is a very good application developer platform, and especially with its branching, and it's also very well. I mean, we had this discussion with Lakebase, when they had Nikita on, which is with its branching, it's well suited for like agents, hitting the database and kind of figuring out how they want to navigate things. The idea if you have these branches that are in their little secure sandboxes, and we can basically kill them or promote them at will. So it's actually a very clever architecture that nobody. I told Nikita, I haven't seen anybody replicate that at this point.
Yeah, and especially it's delivered in such a nice package, which is always the key with SaaS, especially these days when there are so many options out there.
Yeah. Now, we're kind of moving on more to, because no conference these days is, complete without AI and especially agents.
Right.
And last year, Databricks messages, we're going to finally try and simplify ourselves, Databricks One. That's morphed into the Genie family and with Genie One. So Genie, and essentially what it's really saying is that last year we were giving a more of a kind of a natural language, almost chatbot type experience, which everybody else was doing at that point.
Right.
And now it's sort of morphing into sort of an agentic runtime, which more shapes itself to the context of your interaction and the context of what you're trying to do. So Genie One essentially supersedes Databricks One, and it's entered and it's starting out basically. It already has some integrations. For instance, it can be surfaced into Microsoft Teams or Slack. Also, there are mobile there are mobile form factors through native iOS and Android. What's interesting about it is it's another key piece that really makes, and goes back to our discussions with Jessica and others about ontology and and Yitzhak on ontology and semantics. And what's making Genie One possible is what Databricks is calling Genie Ontology. And this is
Yeah.
a layer that's continually operating in the background, and it's continually harvesting on a probabilistic basis. It's essentially the knowledge graph.
Mm-hmm.
And they're harvesting this. And you and I have, we had a discussion about this offline, which we'll bring online right now. But it's basically harvesting, and it's making assumptions based on patterns of interaction and who's doing the interactions with it, to essentially put together not just a knowledge graph, but also kind of the rules, like who's doing what are the policies here. So in effect, so that's essentially what really makes Genie One possible. There are also several other pieces that in other words, this is basically kind of a suite of so-called genies. There are Genie agents, and the idea here is that if you want to basically reuse a particular Genie One interaction, you could basically then save it as a reusable agent, and tap it again. Yeah. There's an app builder, which is basically vibe coding for agents, and of course, at the same time, Databricks, also announced, partnership with Replit. There's Genie Code, which is basically which you can use to plan the workflows for agents. And then here's the interesting part, and this gets into some of the governance and control, which is Genie Zero Ops. Not Zero Dark 30, Zero Ops, but the idea, it's a background ops monitoring agent, and it's looking for things and weird stuff that's going on, may do some auto remediation, may do some alerting, but the idea is that these agents are happening. Somebody's got to be watching what all the cats are doing.
Yeah. And I had a couple of questions. I mean, this was very exciting, automated ontology and such. One question that I had in my mind is that the press release talks a lot about the problem of siloed data, right? Very conventional corporate problem. A lot of the real ontology is in things like chats, right? People are explaining products or explaining the latest marketing numbers inside of chats, emails, other data sources.
Yeah.
And so the goal is to scan those to build the ontology. But that also, any security person will tell you, that's also where some of the most sensitive PII and HPI data exists, is in those chats, right? Of people talking about future product strategy and such. And so I'm curious, I assume Databricks has a story for this. How do you control what the Genie agent can scan to build the ontology? Where's the boundary? What is acceptable to access? What is unacceptable to access? How do you prevent leaks of sensitive information through the ontology and other places? So I'll be curious to watch that story, because I think that's a story across AI, right? That's not just for
no question about it. Yeah. And the fact is, what Databricks will answer is that's what Zero Ops is supposed to do. But obviously, any type of agentic governance, I don't care how basically feature complete, basically vendors claim their governance harnesses are. The fact that these are all works in progress, because we have to learn as we go along.
Right. And you have two problems, right? That you have this hallucination problem, which is a very big problem if you're given the agent's actual control of things. That's an issue.
Yeah.
And then what about when they miss things? There was yet another article published recently about, journalism, where people used agentic tools and they made up all kinds of citations.
Yeah.
Even this far into the game.
I had a number of, and look, this is not exclusive to Databricks, but I did have a lot of these types of conversations here where they say agents are here, and I'm saying, no, they're coming here. Is the trend. And I would have to kind of wash their mouths out with soap, so to speak, metaphorically. It's like, folks, it kind of reminds me of, like, as I said, I quote Merv Adrian, who will be on our show in a couple of weeks. But he had a great, in a speech he gave during actually at a Dupe conference years ago, he said, look, in Silicon Valley, if it's on a whiteboard, it must be real.
Right.
So the thing is, I think there's a lot of it. I think when it comes to agents, there's still a little too much irrational exuberance out there. I think it's great that we're setting up these harnesses, and that's going to actually set up discussion for the next piece that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
But these all works in progress. A good example of this is Databricks announcing a new open source project called Omnigent. This is not something that you put in your dishwasher. But it's what they call a meta harness for agents. The idea is kind of like an Uber control plane that kind of manages all the other control planes, and dealing with things like state and memory management, and tool integration, orchestration, context. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of basically of tasks that they list for this. Obviously, it's because like A to A, this is essentially what Databricks has smartly realized is that this really needs to be an industry effort. It'll be interesting to see if they can coalesce a community around this.
Yeah.
Databricks has had a mixed track record in terms of how they managed open source, in that Spark was a very successful open source project. And Dell, you could say it was successful, except that the fact that Databricks was very was a little bit slow in really opening up to the community. They were busy optimizing it, and that gave room for Iceberg to really emerge and really so. Yeah. And so the paradox today is that Delta has more installs because they have a 5-year jump. Iceberg has momentum. So as I said, it'll be interesting to see. I want to take a look at what type of community, what type of governance gets set up here. It sort of reminds me of the same issue with OSI Open Semantics Interchange. All this is the devil is in the details of the community and the governance.
Right. And this is a problem that, I mean, this has been a problem even before agents, right? Like you have so many different systems that humans are accessing, and each one has their own DBA or, someone managing the permission controls. And then somehow you have to propagate those across different parts of the organization. Right. That problem just kind of explodes when you add a bunch of agents to the mix. And so I think they're pitching this as a way to manage, basically MCP across a whole bunch of different data sources, where MCP is kind of notorious for not having a lot of access controls. And so this would be a centralized place to control access to everything, in theory, if they can make that work.
Well, MCP itself does not have access controls. It's what you implement on atop it. It wasn't meant for that. I mean, as a protocol, it's basically a framework of handshakes. Yeah. And the fact is, once you start putting controls in there, then you start to get then can you imagine basically 30 vendors agreeing on how we do the protocol for controls? Now maybe that may happen, but that's going to be a messier process.
Yeah.
Another piece of the puzzle, just kind of finishing out the AI part of this, Unity AI Gateway. That's not a new product per se, but there's some new features, especially with cost cost controls and what Databricks is calling smart routing. And Databricks is said, Ali was talking about this, that this is like an emerging pattern, that we're going to be using AI to help optimize the use of AI, kind of like an advisory type thing, which makes perfect sense. You need, because basically being a human being, it's hard to scale human effort in terms of figuring out which model should be, especially when we break this up into multi-step workflows. Do we need that big monster, frontier model to do basically a ranking job, for instance, or something like that?
Well, and they talk also about like hard and soft limits on spending, which is something that many organizations desperately need right now.
Yeah. So it's and they've added, Unity did have some coverage of managing models. Now they can also bring in MCP services, agent skills. I mean, these are just logical. These are incremental upgrades. There are some new monitoring capabilities for AI activity, even though I'm sort of wondering where that kind of overlaps with zero ops. And what they call runtime contextual controls. Again, that starts to kind of get into, I think, it sort of overlaps with Omnigent per se, but essentially I look at it as being RBAC on steroids, role-based access control. Again, these are essentially, look, these are important issues to deal with. We're taking our first shots right now.
Yeah, and it's funny, everything is moving so fast that it does feel like we're having to reinvent a lot of things that we already had, right? Like budgets in the cloud, we've had those for a decade or more. But now it's like, no, we need budgets on language models, token budgets, and API budgets. Yeah.
A couple quick things to finish up. One was Customer Lake. And so I'm having myself and a bunch of agents, analysts in the room, maybe we are agents,
perhaps,
kind of had has a WTF reaction to this, like yet another customer, because everybody seems to have their customer data platform, including Snowflake. And my question to Databricks is like, how do you break through the noise? And evidently here, one is that this is too big a pot to ignore, number one. Number two, lots of their customers were using Databricks to basically help profile customers and optimize the customer experience. And And so, yeah, they're going there. But in my discussion with Databricks, they are on one. They are saying we are basically, raising the profile of vertical industry marketing and solution. But I do not expect that Databricks at this point is going to become an apps company. But like everybody, they're going to have everybody has their token customer data platform.
Right. Well,
and so
there's a
Databricks
lot of
is one
exciting
of them.
stuff in here, but some of it feels a bit dystopian, to be frank, right? Like
Yeah.
we've known for years that, Facebook or Google are optimizing their ads for you personally, but now they're saying, okay, but now you have the agents are optimizing interactions and they do it. It's not just a retraining. They do it throughout the day after every time you interact with an ad. Feels a little bit, it kind of makes your skin crawl a bit. And then they also talked about this fact that people are using agents to do research. So it's like agents kind of optimizing for other agents and then, sort of talking to each other through ads.
Yeah, it's like, agents that love agents are the most wonderful agents in the world. Sorry, with my apologies to Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
One final piece, and it came out of an interesting discussion I had with Vast this afternoon. They're going to be up on the show, actually, I believe next week.
I think that's right, yeah.
And Vast is basically distinguished, it's differentiated itself to the fact that, you have folks like the Pure Storages of the world. Yes, we do cloud object storage on-prem. Basically, Vast does it at like hyperscaler scale.
Right.
So very differentiated. And they've gotten some aspects of a data platform. They don't quite have a query engine, but you can use Trino and Spark on it. It's sort of, so they're not really quite a database yet. They claim they're getting there, but again, but what is interesting is that there's a big there with Vast in terms of they are drawing a fast-growing customer base that has large pools of data that, for various reasons, are not going to go into a public cloud. And the thing is that what IBM and Oracle have dealt with successfully, and what Google has come to terms with as well, and AWS to a lesser extent, is dealing with hybrid, with doing hybrid now. And so initially they are announcing a partnership. The partnership at this point is that Vast will have, will have an interface to Unity Catalog. There's nothing that's been promised beyond that, but the thing is, one could imagine that if Databricks were to finally get serious about hybrid, that there would be some push down capabilities. Put this stuff in a container, have that container launch some agents and have them work on the data on-prem and Vast and return the results to Databricks. The fact is that Databricks has, it's not the same thing, but they now basically have cross cloud capabilities where essentially you can have a blanket contract with Databricks and deploy Databricks in whichever hyperscaler you want. And in turn, okay, there probably aren't going to be a lot of cross-cloud workloads, but they will certainly, they will probably be looked to accommodating that. But again, Databricks really has to, yes, there's a very good reason why Databricks stayed, pure cloud. But at some point, if they're going to become the enterprise company that they are, with the scale that they are, they're going to have to deal with hybrid. They're going to have to deal with pushdown.
Well, and I can tell you, as formerly a Snowflake partner, cross-cloud was a big story for Snowflake, which is probably part of the reason that Databricks is pursuing it. Because the reality is, if you're a big enterprise, you probably have accumulated some data, up in the attic on GCP, and you have some other data over on AWS, and you don't want to have to migrate all these jobs or systems, and so you just use Snowflake or now Databricks.
Yeah, but
to move
let's
the data
not confuse cross-cloud with hybrid cloud.
Right. They're kind of two complementary
it goes back to
stories.
Snowflake does not have a hybrid answer either.
They do not. No, not at this point.
Google is interested. It's interesting with Google how they basically are getting pretty proactive there. But again, this is something which, as I said, just want to leave a closing thought. I feel that basically this is something that I think Databricks is going to have to confront. It's going to have some sort of. And I said, I think I could see where they do some push down.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And the nice thing in partnering with Vast is that you've got the on-prem isolation story, and you also have a performance story where they're really pushing and saying, hey, we can do this better than traditional object stores. We're way faster because of the way we manage the data and because of the way we store it to NVMe and Flash.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've only taken twice as much time as we normally should.
Yes.
But there
Well,
was
thank
just
you
a
very
lot.
much,
There was
Tony.
just a lot. There was just a lot to run through here.
Oh yeah, and that's the great thing with the conference like this, when you have really meaty announcements where you're like, there are always a lot of announcements. Some of them
Yeah,
you're just like, this is an incremental feature, but these are like really big announcements, many of
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Pretty
Sounds
exciting
good.
stuff to watch.
Anyway, good talking.
Thanks, Tony, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
We'll do later
Take
on.
care.